Okay, brilliant. If I could get you to start off, can you introduce yourself and what company you work with?
Yeah, hi. So my name's Rob Burns. I am a co-founder and owner of a pet shop called the Hound Hut. We specialize in kind of like trying to give all of our customers as much advice as possible to help them kind of like get through the minefield of information around there, around food, treats, diet, nutrition, and also make it kind of like a really good experience for their pets when they come in and bring them in. It's not, we not only deal with dogs, we also have sort of like cat's corner section, etc. Um, I mean, essentially, we set up the business after my partner Anthony. He used to work in the raw food industry for over 10 years. Um, and was a wholesale manager and used to go around to a lot of pet shops and see kind of like how people were actually doing things and um, noticed that there was kind of like, whilst people were bringing in the natural diet and natural nutrition, there were a lot of people that didn't actually really understand totally the benefits and what was going on with that. And there's kind of like, people will have it in their shop and not actually realize the total holistic approach to feeding your dog kind of like natural foods and natural treats. Um, and so we thought, right, okay, well, we'll bring something a little bit different to light and also kind of like make it a really nice boutique experience to kind of like come into the shop and bring your pets in there. I mean, it's quite fun because we end up having people come into us and just basically say, I can't get past it without my dog dragging me in. So I suppose that's the biggest advert you could ever turn around and sit there and say. So yeah. Um, I think what's really important about what we do is we appreciate that there's lots of different aspects and angles on foods that you can actually feed. Um, and it's about giving people the information that they need to make their own choices. Because there are pros and cons of feeding kind of like a certain diet, like kibble, cold press. What we specialize in is raw food. Um, and also very natural treats. And I think whilst raw is probably always kind of like what we would deem to be the best food because it's the most natural food that a dog could actually potentially eat. If you think of them if they were left to their own devices, how would they actually get food? They'd actually be looking at getting prey, um, and that means kind of like meat and bone. Um, and that's essentially what the raw diet is, and it's trying to, because we have so much experience of it, we can kind of like quite easily help people cut through kind of like a lot of the information that you find online and give them kind of like that focus to turn around and go, oh, actually, a lot of the myths that people worry about with kind of like bacteria in the products, etc. I mean, it is a real worry, but it's more to do if you're actually feeding fresh produce that hasn't been frozen over something that's actually been properly produced and frozen to a certain level, which is basically the freezing is like the cooking. So um, yeah, so that's part of what we do. We also look at kind of like as much as possible to try and see how we can be as sustainable as possible in what we're doing. And I think kind of like if you turn around and start looking at kind of how products are actually made and what people kind of like look at a little bit is, how green can we actually be when we're actually turning around and actually, looking after our pets. It doesn't go for just dogs, it cats, everything and everywhere. Cats need cat litter. Can you use kind of like a more sustainable cat litter, like the wood chipping cat litter that you can get? I got three schnauzers. I go around and try and do a one bag walk, as I call it. So we're not using kind of like too many bags, etc. But it's also sort of like drawn us to actually realize that most of the people that are actually out there, suppliers and competitors and other people, are not really, everything's always in plastics. And that's sort of like kind of unrecyclable or uncompostable. Or it is recyclable, but kind of like, obviously it degrades over a long period of time. So we've started with our natural treats, putting everything into kind of like compostable packaging, which means that our customers who come in can kind of like basically know that they can literally, it's a tin tie bag. You get rid of the tin tie, but the rest of the packaging is basically completely compostable. You can just turn around and throw it, and you know that it's actually going to degrade. But the other thing is that also when it comes down to looking at our natural treats, our natural treats are pretty much bits of body. And when it comes down to looking at that, what you're doing it there is that it's sustainable in so many different levels, because basically you're never going to turn around and change the fact that you actually have this food going through the food chain. So, chicken, beef, all these bits and pieces, and there's so much parts of that food that's actually been thrown away and wasted. And what actually happens if you're actually feeding kind of like natural kind of like dried foods and treats, you're actually kind of like lowering that waste, and stuff going to landfill, etc., or wherever it tends to go. And also what it is it's a very pure and natural treat for the dog. So really, really healthy for them. Things like anything with fur on is fantastic, acts as a natural dewormer for the dogs. If you think about it, in outside in the wild, you don't necessarily see a wolf scooting its bottom across the floor. It's probably because of the fact that it's actually got a nice diet, which a lot of fur in and everything else like that. And so basically it doesn't have the issues that kind of like the dogs in general kind of like can potentially get up. And again, similarly with cats and stuff like that, if you turn around and put some feathers in their diet and stuff like that, that can actually also kind of like really help with that kind of side of things. But yeah, I mean, we always try and strive to kind of like provide kind of like, the best, good nutrition and good value and stuff like that. So
That sounds amazing. I love how environmentally conscious you guys are as well.
wait, monkeys. Sorry, what was that?
I was saying I really appreciate how environmentally conscious you guys are as well. So I think that's what a lot of companies seem to
Trying.
kind of forget.
I mean, if you're looking at foods from an environmental impact, and kind of like people worry about that kind of like whole element of raw and what raw is coming through, and the fact that you've got a much increased kind of the farming of the meat, etc. It's still going to happen anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of the meat is actually kind of like comes directly from um, uh, from human grade quality farms, and so that's always going to be around.
Mm,
Yes, there's a lot of kind of like the main processing of that food is kind of like it's ground down with all the other ingredients, and then it's frozen. So yes, there is kind of like a certain sort of like aspect of high energy use there. But it's also using a lot of offal and other bits and pieces which generally go to waste. So you're kind of like offsetting that balance, like I mentioned earlier with the treats, that kind of like, nothing's really going to waste. The other
mm,
thing you tend to find is that when you look at kind of like things like kibbles are produced under really, really high temperature. So actually
yeah.
they're kind of like less green from an energy consumption, kind of like production sort of sense anyway.
Mm,
And also you've got cold press, which is another food which is produced under more heat, less heat, more pressure, which means it actually retains more of the nutrition. Everything is going to use sort of like a certain sort of like amount of energy, and from that perspective, it's kind of like quite it's difficult because you're also packaging other bits and pieces you're looking into. Used to be a lot now that kind of like you used to get a lot of polystyrene boxes where the frozen food used to come in. That's now
mm.
because of the law changing. Everything is now coming in cardboard, which is great for us because it's just like means that the waste in general is just like going down to zero, and it's all recyclable cardboard waste. And all the plastics and everything else that are used are actually recyclable as well. So it's getting a lot greener than some of the other elements, and I think that there's no silver bullet to being kind of like environmental when it comes down to like anything really.
Mm,
What you've got to look at is, I suppose, it's what you're comfortable with, because every single thing you're going to get is going to kind of like have some kind of like energy usage, CO2 sort of like impact, everything else. And I think it boils down to really the choices that you make about how healthy do I want to feed my animals and how healthy do I want them to be. Similarly, it's like kids with parents with kids and stuff like that. It's you've got to offset kind of like the balance of the environment against the better what's best for you for your family as well. So it's very similar like that with dogs and cats.
That's completely understandable. So obviously you spoke a little bit of the benefits of the kind of the natural treats that you guys provide. Could you give me a bit more information about, and there's you talking about the fur and the feathers, but I'm sure there's more than just those that are the benefits to your treats.
So I mean, basically, if you, I mean, in our experience, what we tend to find is that a lot of people want stuff where they want their dogs to kind of like it's good for their teeth health and gums and sort of like dental sort of like sticks, etc. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, so basically, you end up finding that a lot of people are kind of, when it comes to natural treats, or coming in looking for treats, that they either want sort of like training treats, which are kind of like very, very easy little snippets and bits and pieces to give their dogs. We tend to find the higher value and the ones that they really love are the ones which are kind of like pure meats, etc. But there are also a lot of inquiries about kind of like, what's good for my dog's teeth? Have you got any dental sticks and things like that? Now, that you can get the dental sticks. What we tend to find with the dental sticks is that they tend to be quite high in carbs, and carbs can kind of like act a little bit kind of as well. They transition into sugar kind of like content, which can kind of like add to kind of like dogs kind of like sugar spikes in their blood and stuff. Over something which is kind of like very natural, and essentially when it comes down to sort of like the natural chewing, that kind of like element where they've got something and they're really chewing at the back of their teeth, or even if you get sort of like a raw meat bone that actually has some meat on it, like a duck neck or turkey neck, where the fact that they're actually ripping that meat off with the front teeth, that kind of like gets helped, and it helps naturally kind of like deplaque. There's a bit of a misnomer around the fact that if it's crunchy biscuit, it's actually going to turn around and make my dog's teeth cleaner. And I think what I turn around sort of like tend to say to people is like, well, what happens to your teeth when you eat a biscuit? And dogs' tongues go one way, back and forth. They don't have a dexterous tongue like us where we can turn around and sit there and pick stuff out of the teeth. So therefore, you tend to find that the only way that they can actually turn around and clean their mouth and palate quite well is when they're actually got something that they can hold in between their paws and actually chew on. It tends to be the more natural kind of like sticks, or the better thing for them is actually things that are very, very natural. As I said, when it comes down to kind of like keeping them, what's great with anything with fur, and you can use, and I know people can get a little bit squeamish about this, but if you feed your dogs something with hair once or twice a week, or supplement it into their diet, etc., they don't digest the fur at all. So it kind of like almost goes through their system like a brush, and so it can it cleanses their internal. It's also super hyperallergenic. Really great as a digestive aid as well. But my 3 dogs, I don't think I've ever given them any worming tablets. I only really tend to give them flea treatment because we're surrounded by so many dogs, and when you get to that certain point in the season where everyone's coming in with fleas, they tend to
It is very much a spreadable thing, and
but so.
No, that sounds amazing. I think as well, like people tend to forget is that, pets do have very specific needs similar to humans. You can't just kind of chuck some stuff in a bowl and be like, yeah, that's fine. Or even just giving them loads of table scraps of like your own plate, because like a lot of stuff for them won't work for them. And kind of getting stuff that's really beneficial to like their needs, like you said, with the fur and like with the actual natural bits where they can kind of chew at it and it can help maintain their teeth, it makes such a difference as well to their health and their happiness.
I mean, there's lots of different things that you can turn around and feed them just from your fridge and stuff like that. Carrots and other bits and pieces are sort of like great, but the only thing you've got to realize is that they are pretty much carnivores. They're not kind of like they don't have a system, and their whole their insides are kind of like very acid.
Mm.
And they don't really chew anything. So basically, if you turn around and put a carrot in, it comes out looking like a carrot. Do you know what I mean? So, which is why with certain sort of like foods and stuff, the vegetable content's actually been pulped. When you see a food that's sort of like showing you that it's got peas and everything else in it, it's got nothing nutritionally that's advantageous to the dog as such. It's really kind of like boils down to the fact that it's us looking at it and going, "Oh, isn't this lovely? Isn't it good what I'm doing for my dog?" So they need some help when they're turning around and kind of like getting that stuff and digesting that stuff. At least that's, in my opinion, the way.
No, I
I'm
think
sure
it's
there's
definitely felt
at the moment
across the board.
screaming this podcast going, "No, you're full of."
No, I think we've had previous guests who've actually said similar things as well. So we've had, twin chefs that came on. They actually do, a dog cuisine business. So they do actually work a lot with meat and everything. They said very similar, like with dog food. So, yeah, our last question today is, just for a bit of a giggle, is what's a funny memory you've had whilst owning your dogs? Because you said earlier you had about three. So there's got to be an interesting anecdote.
I've got mum, dad, and daughters. So I mean, like, daughter's going to be the one that's going to kill me. But but no, I mean, I think we've had our shops now for about 5 years. We've got a couple of them, one in Oval, one down in Rochester, and I think that what's really, really lovely about it is that we end up kind of like looking after and we do daycare from time, or we did a big daycare session kind of like through COVID, because we were getting a lot of puppies and we wanted to make sure that they're being socialized, even though we probably shouldn't have done. So you might have to edit that out. But with the daycare and having dogs on daycare, and what would end up happening is that they remember so much that when they come running in, they do what I call glee-wheeze. They get too excited, and then it's just like, oops. It's like the little moment on there. I don't know whether you can get tenor pants for dogs, but I mean, sometimes they need them. But and I think it's really just, I think it's just funny, just some of the things that dogs do. I mean, like, and each one, I think every single breed has a personality, and it's mad, and they don't, and we just see it, and we know just from doing the stuff we've done. I don't know whether there's something really funny that I can say about it, but it's just, I can't think of anything that's kind of like hysterical. I mean, Ollie just turns around and chews the girl's ears. He just sits there, and you go to stroke one of the girls, and it's like, you've got wet ear again. It's like, all right, oh, thanks, Ollie.
It's one way to show affection.
I can't think of anything kind of like too crazy and too funny when it comes down to the pets. It's quite funny when you take a dog upstairs and you sit, and the owner does it. It wasn't the groom that the owner was expecting, but I'm not going to say too much. We're very good at grooming, don't worry.
Okay, so is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up the episode today?
So our business is the Hound Hut. Everything, including all of our social medias, everything's about the dog. So our website is thehoundhut.dog. Our social media is thehoundhut.dog. Our telephone number ends in 364, which is DOG.
Love that.
Pretty, we're not in the States. But we provide kind of like pretty much a 360 kind of like approach, not only to dogs but also to cats, about like nutrition, diet, the best sort of like things that owners can turn around and provide their dogs. And also stuff which is, there's no need to go for the most expensive. Actually, we're trying to kind of like create an environment where it's value for money as well. And, outside of the shop where we have the nutrition with all the toys, we have a big toy chandelier because there's nowhere else to put the toys. So everyone comes in and goes, where are the toys? And you go, look out. And it happens a lot. For me, I just bang my head every 5 minutes because I'm like 6'3". It's just like bang, bang,
Mm.
bang. But outside of that, we also do grooming, we do daycare. We do have a full service for all of that. In both our shops, we have one in Oval in central London
Mm.
and one down in Rochester in the Medway area. So,
Brilliant. Well, thank you
all
so
right.
much for coming on today and sharing your knowledge and it.
Dawn, lovely to meet you. Lovely to speak to you. Look forward to hearing from
Thanks
you.
very much.